In the vast expanse of the Galactic Confederation, where over 10,000 species coexist under the banner of peace and learning, there exists a classification system that every sentient being knows by heart. Class 1 worlds are paradise planets with gentle climates and docile wildlife. Class 5 worlds present moderate challenges. Class 10 worlds are considered extremely dangerous, requiring military-grade equipment for survival. Then there's Earth. Earth doesn't fit the classification system. It broke the scales so badly that the Confederation had to create an entirely new category, Class X, Deathworld. A planet so hostile, so fundamentally designed to kill everything that draws breath, that the very idea of intelligent life evolving there was considered a cosmic impossibility, until humanity proved them wrong. Now, in the most prestigious university in the galaxy, where the brightest minds from across the stars gather to learn the mysteries of the universe, a simple classroom door is about to open. Behind it stands a girl who grew up dodging lightning storms that could vaporize mountains, swimming in oceans filled with creatures that could swallow starships whole, and breathing air so rich with oxygen it could fuel starship engines. She's 10 seconds late for Xenobiology 101. The professor thinks he's prepared for anything the galaxy can throw at him. The students believe they've seen the worst the universe has to offer. They're about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the one trying to hurt you. It's the one trying to help. Welcome to the day everything changed at Kepler Prime University, when a Deathworld girl walked into class and accidentally terrified an entire generation of galactic scholars. This is her story, and how 10 seconds of lateness turned into a legend that would echo across the stars for generations to come. The lecture hall of Kepler Prime University buzzed with the gentle murmur of 100 different languages being translated through neural implants. Professor Zephyrian adjusted his crystalline throat sac, a nervous habit he developed over 3 centuries of teaching, as he surveyed the diverse crowd of students before him. Tentacles, wings, scales, and more exotic appendages filled the tiered seating arrangement, representing nearly 40 species from across the Galactic Confederation. "Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology," Professor Zephyrian announced, his voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "I am Professor Zephyrian of the Valerian species, and I have spent the last 300 standard years studying the most dangerous life forms our galaxy has to offer." A ripple of excitement passed through the assembled students. This was one of the most coveted courses at the university, known for its hands-on approach to studying lethal alien creatures. Only the brightest and most capable students were accepted, and even then, the mortality rate was considerably higher than the university administrators liked to admit. Zephyrian's multiple eyes scanned the room, automatically categorizing his students by species and probable survivability. The Altarian delegation sat in the front row, their blue-scaled hides gleaming under the artificial lighting. They were tough, evolved on a world where the oceans regularly froze and thawed in violent cycles. Behind them, a cluster of Rigelian scholars huddled together, their gossamer wings folded tightly against their backs. Fragile, but possessed of incredible intelligence and natural toxin resistance. In the middle section, he spotted the familiar bulk of a young Draconian, her red scales marking her as nobility from the inner worlds. Draconians were apex predators on their homeworld, capable of breathing fire and withstanding incredible physical trauma. She would likely survive whatever the course threw at them. This semester, the professor continued, we will be studying creatures that have been classified as Class 9 or higher on the Confederation danger scale. These are life forms so dangerous that encounter protocols require military backup and full environmental suits. The students leaned forward with anticipation. This was what they had come for, the chance to study the most lethal organisms the galaxy had cataloged. Zephyrian activated the holographic display at the front of the room. A massive, writhing creature appeared in 3-dimensional detail, its tentacles covered in what looked like crystalline spines. Our first specimen is the Altarian Depth Strangler, he announced. Found in the deepest ocean trenches of Altair 7, This creature is responsible for the deaths of over 300 research teams. It generates an electrical field capable of stopping a starship's engines and has been known to drag entire submarines into the planetary core. Several students made appreciative noises. A few of the Altarians in the front row puffed their chest sacks with pride, clearly pleased that their homeworld had produced such an impressive predator. The Depth Strangler's hunting strategy is particularly elegant, Zephyrian continued, manipulating the hologram to show the creature in action. It lies in wait at thermal vents, using the natural electromagnetic interference to mask its biosignature. When prey approaches, the lecture hall's entrance door slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. Every head in the room turned to look at the latecomer. Professor Zephyrian's prepared lecture died in his throat as a figure stepped through the doorway, and absolute silence fell over the assembled students. She was small by galactic standards, barely reaching the chest height of the average Altarian student. Her skin was a pale pinkish color, marked by what appeared to be old scars along her arms and neck. Hair the color of dying stars fell around her shoulders in what most species would consider a chaotic tangle. But it was her eyes that drew attention, bright blue orbs that seemed to take in everything at once, with a predatory alertness that made several students unconsciously lean away from the aisle. "Sorry I'm late, Professor," she said in perfect galactic standard, though her accent carried undertones that the translation matrix seemed to struggle with. Transport from the orbital station was delayed. Professor Zephyrian found his voice, though it came out as more of a squeak than his usual authoritative tone. "And you are?" The human female consulted a small datapad. "Sarah Chun, transfer student from a Sol system. I'm registered for Advanced Xenobiology, Section 7. The silence in the room became absolutely deafening. Every student, regardless of species, stared at the human with a mixture of fascination and growing horror. Professor Zephyrian felt his gill slits flutter rapidly, a sign of acute distress among his kind. "Sol system," he repeated slowly, as if the words might change meaning if he said them carefully enough. "As in, Earth." "That's right," Sarah confirmed cheerfully, beginning to move down the aisle toward an empty seat. Several students pressed themselves back in their chairs as she passed, though she seemed oblivious to their reactions. "Beautiful planet, if you can survive the wildlife." Which most visitors can't, but the university's exchange program said you were looking for students with practical experience in dangerous xenobiology. As Sarah walked down the aisle, Professor Zephyrian's mind raced through everything he knew about Earth and its inhabitants. The planet was classified as beyond the danger scale, a world so hostile that it had never been successfully colonized by any Confederation species. The few research expeditions that had attempted to study Earth's ecosystem had returned with casualty rates approaching 100%. And yet somehow, an entire species had not only survived on that nightmare world, but had thrived enough to develop space travel and apply for Confederation membership. Sarah settled into a seat in the fourth row, between a nervous-looking Rigelian and a Draconian who was studying her with the intense interest of a predator encountering something new. She pulled out a standard datapad and stylus, then looked up expectantly at Professor Zephyrian. "Please, continue with your lecture about the Depth Strangler," she said politely. "It sounds fascinating." Professor Zephyrian realized that every student in the room was still staring at the human. He cleared his throat sac and attempted to regain control of his classroom. "Yes, well, the Altarian Depth Strangler, as I was saying." But his words felt hollow now. How could he lecture about dangerous xenobiology to a student who came from Earth? It was like trying to explain the concept of heat to a star. The Rigelian next to Sarah raised one delicate wing. "Professor, if I may ask, is it true that Earth has predators that hunt for sport rather than sustenance?" Sarah turned to look at the Rigelian with interest. "Oh yes, quite a few actually. Cats are probably the most obvious example, though they're mostly harmless to humans. Well, the small ones are. The big cats can be a problem if you're not careful." "Big cats?" the Rigelian whispered, her wings trembling slightly. "Lions, tigers, leopards, jaguars, Sarah explained matter-of-factly. They're ambush predators, usually. Lions hunt in packs, which makes them particularly dangerous. A pride can take down prey much larger than themselves through coordinated attacks. The Draconian leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. How large are these lions? Sarah considered this. Adult males can weigh up to 200 kilograms, I think. They're not the biggest predators on Earth, though. Polar bears are larger, and they're much more aggressive. Then, there are the marine predators, great white sharks, orcas, blue whales when they're feeding. Blue whales. Professor Zephyrian found himself asking despite his better judgment. Largest animals on Earth, Sarah explained. They can grow up to 30 meters long and weigh as much as a small starship. When they're feeding, they can consume several tons of krill in a single gulp. The suction force is powerful enough to pull in small boats. A collective shudder ran through the assembled students. Professor Zephyrian felt his chromatophores shifting involuntarily, displaying the pale yellow of extreme anxiety. But surely, interjected an Altarian student, humans must live in protected cities, away from these creatures. Sarah laughed, and the sound somehow managed to be both pleasant and terrifying. Not really. Most humans live alongside Earth's wildlife. We've learned to coexist, for the most part. Though you do have to be careful in certain areas. The Australian continent is particularly challenging. How so? Asked the Draconian, her scales now showing the deep red of intense curiosity. Well, most of the wildlife there evolved specifically to kill things, Sarah said conversationally. There are spiders whose venom can kill an adult human in 15 minutes, snakes that can strike faster than the human I can follow, jellyfish that cause paralysis, and cardiac arrest on contact. Oh, and the drop bears, of course. Drop bears, Professor Zephyrian whispered. Predatory marsupials that hunt by dropping out of trees onto their prey, Sarah explained. They can weigh up to 30 kilograms and have claws capable of crushing bone. Very territorial, and they tend to hunt in family groups. The silence that followed this statement was broken only by the soft whimpering of several Rigelian students. Professor Zephyrian tried desperately to regain control of his lecture. Yes, well, Earth's ecosystem is certainly unique, but we're here to study more conventional danger species. Let us return to the Altarian Depth Strangler. He reactivated the holographic display, showing the massive tentacled creature in all its terrifying glory. The students dutifully turned their attention back to the projection, though many kept glancing nervously at Sarah. The Depth Strangler's most dangerous weapon is its bioelectric field, Professor Zephyrian continued. It can generate up to 50,000 volts of electricity, enough to disable most spacecraft and kill any biological entity within a 50-meter radius. Sarah raised her hand. Yes, Miss Chun. Have you considered that it might not be generating the electricity itself? She asked. On Earth, we have electric eels that can produce about 600 volts, but they do it through specialized cells called electrocytes. For a creature to generate 50,000 volts, it would need either an enormous number of these cells or some kind of organic capacitor system. Professor Zephyrian blinked several times. Yes, that's actually one of the theories we've been investigating. How do you know about electrocytes? Most Earth fish have some form of bioelectricity, Sarah explained. It's used for navigation, communication, and hunting. Sharks can detect electrical fields as weak as 5 billionths of a volt. It helps them locate prey and navigate through the oceans. The Altarian student who had spoken earlier raised her gill covers in confusion. But surely such creatures would be classified as extremely dangerous. Sarah looked puzzled. Sharks? Not really. They're actually quite shy around humans. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than attacked by a shark. Though I suppose that's not saying much, since lightning strikes kill about 2,000 humans per year. 2,000 per year? Professor Zephyrian felt his throat sac constrict. It's not that bad, Sarah said reassuringly. Earth's population is over 8 billion, so the odds are pretty low for any individual. Lightning is mostly dangerous if you're caught in the open during a storm. Most humans know to seek shelter when the weather turns bad. And what, asked the Draconian slowly, constitutes bad weather on Earth? Sarah thought about this. Well, that depends on the region. Hurricanes and typhoons can have wind speeds over 300 kilometers per hour and dump several meters of rain in a few hours. Tornadoes are more localized, but can have wind speeds up to 500 kilometers per hour. Blizzards can drop the temperature below minus 40 degrees and create whiteout conditions where you can't see more than a meter in front of you. She paused, seeming to consider whether she'd covered everything important. Oh, and hailstorms can produce ice balls the size of a human head, falling at terminal velocity. Those can be pretty dangerous if you're not undercover. Then, there are dust storms that can engulf entire cities, volcanic eruptions that block out the sun for months at a time, and tsunamis that can travel across entire oceans and reach heights of over 30 meters when they make landfall. The lecture hall had gone completely silent again. Professor Zephyrian could hear the soft humming of the building's life support systems and the rapid breathing of terrified students. "Ow," whispered the Rigelian next to Sarah. "Do any of you survive to adulthood?" Sarah smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than anything she had said so far. Humans are pretty adaptable. We learn to read weather patterns, build appropriate shelters, and help each other out when things get bad. The mortality rate has dropped significantly since we developed modern technology and early warning systems. What was it before? Professor Zephyrian asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Before modern medicine and technology? Hard to say exactly, but infant mortality was probably around 30 to 40% in most regions, higher in particularly dangerous areas. But the survivors tended to be pretty tough. The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. Every species represented in the classroom came from worlds where infant mortality was less than 1%, even among the most dangerous civilizations. The idea that humans had evolved under conditions where nearly half of all children died before reaching adulthood was beyond their comprehension. Professor Zephyrian looked at his holographic depth strangler, then at Sarah, then back at the hologram. Somehow, the creature that had seemed so terrifyingly dangerous just minutes ago now looked almost mundane. He cleared his throat sac again. Perhaps we should discuss the curriculum for this course. I had planned to focus on Class 9 and Class 10 organisms, but given Miss Chin's presence, I'm wondering if we should adjust our approach. Sarah looked concerned. I hope my being here won't cause problems. I'm really looking forward to learning about galactic xenobiology. Earth's ecosystem is pretty limited compared to what's available in the rest of the galaxy. Limited? Professor Zephyrian felt something that might have been hysteria bubbling up in his chest sac. Sarah Chun, daughter of the most nightmarish world in the known galaxy, was describing her planet's biosphere as limited. "Miss Chun," he said carefully, "what exactly do you hope to get out of this course?" Sarah's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Well, I'd love to learn about parallel evolution in different environments. Earth's isolation meant that our evolutionary paths were pretty unique, so I'm curious about how life develops under different conditions. Particularly, I'm interested in the relationship between environmental pressure and adaptive radiation." The Draconian raised her head. "What kind of environmental pressure are we talking about?" "Oh, the usual things," Sarah said casually. "Ice ages, asteroid impacts, volcanic supereruptions, massive extinction events. Earth's had at least 5 major extinction events in its history, where 70 to 90% of all species were wiped out. But life always bounced back, usually stronger and more diverse than before." Professor Zephyrian made a mental note to significantly revise his lesson plans, possibly to include meditation and stress management techniques for his students. The Rigelian student raised a trembling wing. "Miss Chun, you mentioned that you had practical experience in dangerous xenobiology. What exactly does that mean?" Sarah brightened. "Oh, I grew up on a research station in the Amazon rainforest. My parents were studying biodiversity in tropical ecosystems. It's one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth, but also one of the most dangerous. Great place to learn field biology, though you have to be careful about the local wildlife. What kind of wildlife? Asked the Altarian, though her gills were already fluttering with anxiety. Well, jaguars and anacondas are the major predators, but they mostly leave humans alone if you respect their territory. The real dangers are usually the smaller creatures. Poison dart frogs, for instance. Some species have enough toxin in their skin to kill 10 adult humans. Then, there are the various venomous spiders, scorpions, centipedes. Sarah seemed to notice the increasingly horrified expressions around her. But it's really not that bad once you know what to look for, she added helpfully. Most dangerous animals give warning signs before they attack. You just have to learn to read the signals and respect their space. Professor Zephyrian realized that his planned lecture on the Altarian Depth Strangler was probably not going to happen today, or possibly ever. How could he explain the dangers of a creature that lived in the deep ocean to students who were now mentally comparing it to Sarah's casual description of her childhood playground? He looked out at his class and saw expressions ranging from fascination to outright terror. The Rigelians were huddled together, their wings wrapped around each other for comfort. The Altarians were displaying pale, stressed colors, and even the Draconian looked unsettled. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should take a different approach to this course. Miss Chun, would you be willing to share some of your field experience with the class? Sarah looked surprised, but pleased. Of course. I'd be happy to help. What would you like to know? Before Professor Zephyrian could respond, the Draconian raised her hand. You mentioned learning to read warning signals. Could you give us an example? Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Sure. Take rattlesnakes, for instance. They're venomous pit vipers found throughout the Americas. Before striking, they'll usually coil up and shake their tail, which is specialized segments that create a distinctive rattling sound. It's their way of saying, I'm here, I'm dangerous, please go away. If you hear that sound, you freeze, identify the snake's location, and then slowly back away. What happens if you don't hear the warning? Asked the Altarian. Then, you might get bitten, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Rattlesnake venom is hemotoxic and cytotoxic, which means it destroys blood cells and tissue. Without treatment, you could lose a limb or die within a few hours. But most humans who grow up in rattlesnake territory learn to recognize the sound from childhood. The room fell quiet again. Professor Zephyrian found himself wondering how he was going to explain to the university administration that his advanced xenobiology course had been derailed by a single human student sharing stories about her relatively normal childhood. Miss Chun, he said finally, I think it might be beneficial if you could guest lecture for us about Earth's ecosystem. From a comparative xenobiology perspective, of course. Sarah looked delighted. I'd love to, though I should mention that I'm really more of a generalist. Each region of Earth has its own specialists who could give much more detailed information. There are regional specialists, the Rigelian whispered. Oh yes, thousands of them. Marine biology, entomology, herpetology, ornithology, mammalogy, mycology. Earth's biodiversity is so complex that most scientists spend their entire careers studying just one small aspect of it. Professor Zephyrian felt a strange sense of unreality settling over him. Here he was, supposedly one of the galaxy's foremost experts in dangerous life forms, learning that his entire field of study was apparently considered a basic childhood education topic on Earth. How many species are there on Earth? He asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Sarah frowned thoughtfully. Current estimates are somewhere between 8 and 12 million species, but that's probably conservative. We discover new species all the time, especially in deep ocean environments and tropical rainforests. Most estimates suggest we've only cataloged about 20% of Earth's total biodiversity. 12 million species. Professor Zephyrian's homeworld had exactly 47 native species, and that was considered remarkably diverse by Confederation standards. And humans coexist with all of these? The Draconian asked. More or less, Sarah said cheerfully, though coexist might be putting it generously. Humans have caused a fair number of extinctions through habitat destruction and climate change. We're working on being better environmental stewards, but it's a complex problem. The casual way she mentioned causing extinctions, multiple extinctions, as an unfortunate side effect of human civilization was perhaps the most terrifying thing any of the students had heard yet. Professor Zephyrian looked at his chronometer and realized that the class period was nearly over. He hadn't covered a single item from his carefully prepared syllabus, but he had learned more about dangerous xenobiology in the last hour than in his previous century of teaching. I think, he said slowly, we're going to need to restructure this entire course. Sarah looked concerned. I hope I haven't disrupted your plans too much, Professor. I really am here to learn. Professor Zephyrian looked at her, this small, scarred, cheerful representative of a species that had somehow survived and thrived on a world that broke every known rule about habitable planets, and felt something that might have been professional inadequacy mixed with profound respect. Miss Chun, he said, I have a feeling you're going to teach us far more than we could ever teach you. As the class period ended and students began filing out of the lecture hall, Professor Zephyrian noticed that most of them gave Sarah a wide berth. Not out of dislike, he realized, but out of a kind of awestruck reverence. It was the same way they might treat a live volcano or a black hole, something so fundamentally dangerous and powerful that proximity required extreme caution, even when it seemed perfectly friendly. Sarah gathered her things and approached the podium where Professor Zephyrian was still standing, trying to process what had just happened to his carefully planned curriculum. Professor, she said politely, I wanted to thank you for welcoming me to the class. I know having a human student might be unusual. Unusual, Professor Zephyrian repeated weakly. Yes, that's certainly one way to put it. Sarah smiled again, that unsettling expression that somehow conveyed both genuine warmth and the casual confidence of an apex predator. I'm really looking forward to learning about galactic biodiversity. Earth's been pretty isolated, so this is all new to me. As she walked out of the lecture hall, Professor Zephyrian remained standing at the podium, staring at the holographic projection of the Altarian Depth Strangler that still hung in the air before him. Tomorrow, he would have to completely redesign his course. The day after that, he would probably need to redesign his entire understanding of what constituted dangerous life forms. But tonight, he was going to go home and research everything he could about Earth and its impossibly, terrifyingly adaptable inhabitants. He had a feeling he was going to need it. News of the human student's arrival at Kepler Prime University spread through the campus networks faster than a quantum pulse transmission. By the time Sarah Chin finished her first day of classes, her presence had become the primary topic of discussion in every dormitory, study group, and faculty lounge across the sprawling academic complex. Dr. Vexera Kinus, head of Xenobiology Studies, was reviewing incident reports when her communication console chimed with an urgent priority message from Professor Zephyrian. She opened the file and began reading, her normally composed expression shifting through surprise, concern, and, finally, settling into something approaching disbelief. According to Zephyrian's report, the human student had casually described her homeworld's limited biodiversity as consisting of approximately 12 million species, most of which were actively trying to kill everything around them. She had grown up in an environment where the local wildlife included creatures whose mere touch could cause paralytic death, and she considered this a normal childhood experience. Dr. Kinus set down the report and activated her personal research terminal. As one of the galaxy's leading experts in dangerous xenobiology, she had access to classified files that most academics never saw. The Earth file was extensive, marked with more danger warnings than she had ever seen on a single document. What she read made her question everything she thought she knew about the limits of biological adaptation. Earth's atmospheric composition alone should have been lethal to most known life forms. 21% oxygen created an environment so reactive that most organic compounds would spontaneously combust. The planet's magnetic field fluctuated wildly, allowing deadly radiation to bombard the surface. Weather systems generated energy outputs comparable to fusion bombs on a regular basis. And Yet, not only had life survived on this nightmare world, it had flourished to a degree that made the most biodiverse planets in the Confederation look sterile by comparison. Dr. Kinus scrolled through atmospheric readings, geological surveys, and biological sample analyses. Each page made Earth seem more impossible than the last. How could any species evolve intelligence under such conditions? How could they develop technology when their planet was actively trying to exterminate them at every moment? Her contemplation was interrupted by a soft chime indicating an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display activated, revealing the worried face of Chancellor Mordok, the university's Centaurian administrator. Dr. Kinus, the Chancellor began without preamble. I've been receiving calls from concerned parents across the sector. Apparently, word has gotten out about our unique transfer student. The human, Dr. Kinus acknowledged. Indeed, some parents are demanding that their children be transferred to different courses or even different universities. They're concerned about the safety implications of having a Deathworld native in close proximity to their offspring. Dr. Kinus considered this. From a purely logical standpoint, the parents' concerns were not unreasonable. Humans had evolved under conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. There was no telling what kind of biological adaptations they might possess, what diseases they might carry, or what instinctive behaviors they might display under stress. Have there been any actual incidents? She asked. Not yet, the Chancellor admitted. But the day is young. I'm calling an emergency faculty meeting to discuss protocols for managing this situation. Your expertise in dangerous xenobiology makes your input essential. Dr. Kinus agreed to attend the meeting and close the transmission. She looked back at the Earth file on her screen, then made a decision that would prove more significant than she could imagine. Instead of simply reviewing the official reports, she decided to observe the human student directly. Meanwhile, across campus, Sarah Chun was having lunch in the university's main cafeteria, blissfully unaware of the administrative chaos her presence had unleashed. She had selected a table near the large observation windows that offered a view of Kepler Prime's stunning triple sunset and was working her way through what appeared to be a standard university meal. What she didn't notice was that every other table in her immediate vicinity had slowly emptied as students found reasons to relocate to other areas of the vast dining hall. She also didn't notice the growing crowd of observers who had positioned themselves at what they considered a safe distance, watching her every movement with fascination and barely controlled terror. Zara Veltar, a third-year Altarian student majoring in xenobiology, had been among the first to arrive at the cafeteria after word spread that the human was eating there. She had claimed a table approximately 50 meters away, which her instincts told her was the minimum safe distance from an unknown apex predator. Look at how she's holding her eating utensil, whispered her friend Crix, a Rigelian whose normally iridescent wings had gone pale with anxiety. Those manipulator appendages, they're so precise. Do you think they're designed for grasping prey? Zara studied Sarah's hands as she used her fork to sample what appeared to be synthesized protein. The human's fingers did move with remarkable dexterity and control, she had to admit. Each movement was economical and purposeful, suggesting highly developed fine motor skills. And notice her posture, added Titrices, a young draconian who had joined their impromptu observation session. She's constantly scanning the environment. See how her head moves? She's tracking every entrance and exit. It was true. Sarah's head did turn frequently as she ate, though to her it was simply curiosity about her new environment. To the watching students, it looked like the hyper-vigilant behavior of a predator constantly assessing potential threats and escape routes. My evolutionary biology professor says that continuous environmental awareness is a key characteristic of apex predator species, THYSS continued. They never fully relax, even when feeding. As if to underscore this point, Sarah suddenly went very still, her head tilting slightly as if she had heard something. The watching students held their breath, wondering what had triggered her predator instincts. Actually, Sarah had simply noticed the unusual quiet in her section of the cafeteria, and was puzzled by the fact that she seemed to be dining alone despite the obvious crowding elsewhere in the room. She looked around, tried to understand if there was some social protocol she was missing. Her gaze swept across the observation area where Zara and her friends were sitting. When her eyes met Zara's, the Altarian student felt a chill run through her gill slits. Those blue eyes seemed to look right through her, as if calculating her potential as either threat or prey. Sarah, noticing that she had made eye contact with another student, smiled and offered a small wave. It was intended as a friendly gesture. To Zara, it looked like a predator acknowledging the presence of smaller creatures while deciding whether they were worth the effort to hunt. "She saw us," Crix whispered, his wings beginning to flutter with panic. "Do you think we should run?" "Don't make any sudden movements," THYSS advised, her voice tight with controlled fear. Running might trigger a pursuit response. The three students sat frozen in their chairs, maintaining eye contact with Sarah while trying to project calm submission. This continued for several long seconds until Sarah, confused by their strange behavior, simply shrugged and returned to her meal. "I think we're safe," Zara breathed after a moment. "She's decided we're not worth hunting." Their relief was short-lived. A few minutes later, Sarah finished her meal and stood up, gathering her tray to return it to the automated collection system. As she walked past their table, she slowed and approached them. The three students went rigid with terror. "Hi," Sarah said pleasantly. "I'm Sarah Chun. I just transferred here from Earth. I couldn't help but notice you were watching me eat, and I wondered if I was doing something wrong. I'm still learning about galactic social customs." Zara found herself staring up at the human from close range. Sarah was smaller than most galactic species, but there was something in the way she carried herself that suggested coiled strength. Her movements were fluid and controlled, with an economy of motion that spoke of perfect body awareness. "And no," Zara managed to stammer, "you weren't doing anything wrong. We were just curious about human dietary habits." Sarah's face lit up with interest. "Oh, are you xenobiology students? That's great. I'm really excited about studying galactic biodiversity. Earth's been so isolated that most of our biological knowledge is limited to our own ecosystem." She pulled out the chair next to Zara and sat down, apparently oblivious to the way all three students pressed themselves back in their seats. "What are your species' homeworlds like?" Sarah asked with genuine curiosity. "I'd love to learn about different evolutionary pressures and adaptive strategies." Crix, the Rigelian, found his voice first. "My homeworld is Rigel V. It's quite peaceful. Our species evolved from arboreal filter feeders. We mainly eat airborne microorganisms and flower nectar." "That's fascinating," Sarah said, leaning forward with interest. "How do you process such dilute nutrition sources? Do you have specialized digestive systems?" "We have extended intestinal tracts," Crix explained nervously, "and symbiotic bacteria that help break down complex carbohydrates." "Like termites," Sarah exclaimed. "Earth insects that eat would have similar bacterial symbionts. It's a great example of mutualistic evolution." THYSS spoke up, emboldened by Sarah's apparent friendliness. "What about Earth?" Professor Zephyrian said it was classified as a death world. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "I suppose it is pretty dangerous compared to most planets. But you adapt to what you grow up with, you know? Every environment has its challenges." "What kind of challenges?" Zara asked, despite her better judgment. "Well, where I grew up in the Amazon, you had to be careful about the local wildlife. Jaguars, anacondas, caimans, poison dart frogs, various venomous spiders, and snakes. Then there are the plants. Some can cause severe chemical burns just from touching them. And the insects, of course." "Insects," Crix whispered, his wings trembling. "Bullet ants have the most painful sting known to Earth science," Sarah explained conversationally. "Being stung by one is described as feeling like being shot with a bullet, hence the name. The pain can last for 24 hours. Some indigenous tribes use them in coming-of-age ceremonies." The three students stared at her in horror. "But that's just one species," Sarah continued cheerfully. "There are also giant centipedes that can grow over 30 centimeters long and have venom that can kill small mammals, and army ant colonies that can contain over 20 million individuals moving as a coordinated superorganism, devouring everything in their path. THYSS, being a draconian and therefore somewhat more resistant to intimidation than her companions, managed to ask, how do humans survive in such an environment? Education and preparation, Sarah replied. You learn to identify dangerous species, understand their behavior patterns, and take appropriate precautions. Most predators will leave you alone if you respect their territory and don't threaten them. It's really just a matter of understanding the ecosystem and your place in it. Dr. Kinnus, who had been observing this conversation from a carefully concealed position across the cafeteria, found herself taking rapid notes on her datapad. The humans' casual discussion of survival strategies in an environment that would challenge a fully armed military unit was providing invaluable insight into how humans had managed to survive on their impossible homeworld. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that the human posed a very different kind of danger than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't that Sarah Chun was actively threatening or aggressive. It was that her very existence challenged every assumption about what was possible in biological evolution. The conversation at the table continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah enthusiastically sharing information about Earth's biodiversity while the three galactic students listened in fascinated horror. She described great white sharks that could breach completely out of the water while hunting, octopi that could change color and shape to perfectly mimic their surroundings, and electric eels that could generate enough current to power small electronic devices. The thing that always amazed me about Earth's oceans, Sarah said, is how little we actually know about them. We've explored less than 5% of our deep ocean environments. There are probably thousands of species down there that we've never even imagined. Thousands of unknown species, Zara repeated faintly, in environments too dangerous to explore. Oh, the deep ocean isn't that dangerous if you have the right equipment, Sarah said. The real challenge is the pressure. At the deepest point in Earth's oceans, the pressure is over 1,000 times what it is at sea level. It would instantly crush most surface-dwelling creatures. And yet life exists there, THYSS stated, though it came out more as a question. Absolutely. Deep-sea creatures have developed amazing adaptations. Giant tube worms that live near volcanic vents and have no digestive systems. They get all their nutrition from symbiotic bacteria. Creatures with transparent flesh, bioluminescent lures, and jaw structures that can unhinge to swallow prey larger than themselves. Dr. Kinnus closed her datapad and began walking toward the exit. She had heard enough to understand that the emergency faculty meeting was going to be even more complex than Chancellor Murdoch had anticipated. The conversation at the table was finally winding down when Sarah glanced at her chronometer and realized she was going to be late for her next class. I should get going, she said, standing up. It was really nice meeting you all. I hope we can talk more about comparative xenobiology sometime. As Sarah gathered her things and headed for the exit, the three students remained sitting in stunned silence. Did that just happen? Crix asked finally. I think, Zara said slowly, we just had a casual conversation with the most dangerous biological entity in the known galaxy. And she was nice, THYSS added, sounding confused. Why was she nice? Meanwhile, Sarah was walking across campus toward her next class, Advanced Physics of Stellar Engineering, completely unaware that her lunch conversation had been recorded by university security systems and would soon be analyzed by xenobiologists throughout the Confederation. She was also unaware that a growing number of students and faculty members were beginning to follow her at what they considered safe distances, documenting her behavior and trying to understand how a species that had evolved under such impossible conditions could produce individuals who seemed so remarkably normal. Behind her, she left the cafeteria full of shaken students and one very concerned xenobiology department head who was beginning to realize that hosting a human exchange student was going to require a complete reevaluation of everything they thought they knew about dangerous life forms. As Sarah entered the physics building, Dr. Kinnuss activated her personal communicator and placed an urgent call to Chancellor Mordock. "Chancellor," she said when the connection opened, "we need to move up that faculty meeting, and we're going to need to bring in experts from outside the university." "How concerned should we be?" the Chancellor asked. Dr. Kinnuss looked back toward the cafeteria, where she could see students still clustering in groups, talking in animated whispers about their encounters with the human student. "Chancellor," she said carefully, "I think we're dealing with something unprecedented in galactic education. We have a student who represents the ultimate result of evolution under impossible conditions, and she's completely unaware of how extraordinary she is. Is that dangerous?" "That," Dr. Kinnuss replied, "is what we need to figure out. But I suspect the answer is going to change everything we think we know about the limits of biological adaptation." As she closed the communication link, Dr. Kinnuss found herself wondering if Kepler Prime University was prepared to host a student who had casually redefined their understanding of what life could achieve when pushed to its absolute limits. The day was only half over, and Saracen still had 4 more classes to attend. Dr. Kinnuss had a feeling it was going to be a very long semester. The emergency faculty meeting convened in the university's highest security conference room, a chamber typically reserved for discussions of classified research projects and diplomatic incidents. Chancellor Mordock looked around the assembled group: 12 department heads, 3 xenobiology specialists, 2 cultural anthropologists, and 1 very nervous-looking security chief, and realized that in his 40 years of academic administration, he had never faced a situation quite like this. "Let me begin by stating the obvious," he said, his Centaurian vocal cords producing the deep, resonant tones that a species used for formal occasions. "We have a student who is fundamentally challenging our understanding of biological possibility, and we have no protocols for managing the situation." Dr. Kinnuss activated the holographic display and began presenting the data she had collected over the past 6 hours. Brain scans, biological samples, and behavioral analysis scrolled through the air above the conference table. "The human student appears to be in perfect health by galactic standards," she began. "However, her baseline physiology is so far outside our normal parameters that we're essentially looking at an entirely new category of biological entity." Professor Yulink, a Syrian specialist in evolutionary biology, raised one of his 4 arms. "Specify outside normal parameters. Her muscle density is approximately 30% higher than the galactic average," Dr. Kinnuss replied. "Her bone structure shows adaptation to gravitational forces significantly stronger than standard habitable worlds. Her nervous system demonstrates reaction times that would be considered superhuman in any other species we've studied." "And these are normal characteristics for humans?" asked Dr. Tisra, the head of cultural anthropology. "According to our limited data on Earth and its inhabitants, yes. But here's what's truly remarkable." Dr. Kinnuss manipulated the display to show a complex neural mapping. Her brain shows adaptations for processing multiple simultaneous threat assessments, environmental analysis, and crisis response that suggest her species evolved under constant predation pressure. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "You're saying," Chancellor Mordock said slowly, "that humans evolve intelligence specifically as a survival mechanism against their own planet?" "That appears to be correct. Every aspect of human physiology and neurology that we've been able to analyze suggests adaptation to an environment of constant, extreme danger." Security Chief Croton, a massive Krillian whose species had evolved as pack hunters, shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair. "Should we consider the student a security threat? That's the question, isn't it?" Dr. Kinnuss replied. "From a purely physical standpoint, she could probably kill most students with her bare hands without breaking a sweat. But all behavioral analysis suggests that she has no aggressive intentions whatsoever." Professor Zephyrian, who had remained silent up to this point, finally spoke up. "I've been reviewing the literature on human psychology and social behavior. What we're dealing with isn't just physical adaptation. It's psychological adaptation to living in a constant state of potential crisis. Explain, the Chancellor requested. Humans appear to have developed extraordinary stress management capabilities. They can remain calm and functional in situations that would cause most species to panic. But more than that, they seem to actually thrive under pressure. Crisis situations that would incapacitate other species appear to sharpen human cognitive abilities. Dr. Tessara leaned forward. Are you suggesting that humans are psychologically adapted to danger? I'm suggesting, Professor Zephyrian said carefully, that humans may be the only known species whose baseline psychological state is what other species would consider a combat mentality. The silence that followed this statement was broken by a soft chime indicating an incoming priority message. Chancellor Mordoc's personal assistant appeared on the communication screen. Sir, the assistant said, I'm receiving reports from across campus about the human students' afternoon classes. The reports are unusual. What kind of reports? The Chancellor asked with resignation. In advanced stellar engineering, she apparently solved a warp field stability problem that had been stumping the professor for the past 3 years. She used what she described as basic fluid dynamics principles from Earth meteorology. Chancellor Mordock felt a familiar sensation of reality becoming increasingly flexible around the edges. Continue. In comparative exogeology, she identified 17 potential biosphere indicators in a geological survey that the class had been analyzing for weeks. When asked how she knew what to look for, she said it was similar to reading landscape formations to predict weather patterns and wildlife distribution. Of course it was, Dr. Kinthus murmured. And in advanced mathematics of hyperspatial navigation, she apparently derived a new optimization equation for calculating jump coordinates through gravitational anomalies. She said it reminded her of calculating ballistic trajectories while accounting for wind patterns and atmospheric density changes. The faculty members looked at each other with expressions ranging from bewilderment to professional inadequacy. Sir, the assistant continued, the professors are requesting guidance on how to handle a student whose practical experience apparently makes her more qualified to teach their courses than they are. Chancellor Mordock closed the communication link and looked around the table at his distinguished faculty. Suggestions? Professor Yulink raised an arm tentatively. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that we're approaching this from the wrong angle. How so? We've been thinking of Miss Chun as a potentially dangerous anomaly that we need to manage. What if we instead consider her as an unprecedented learning opportunity? Dr. Kinthus looked thoughtful. You're suggesting we study her rather than worry about her. I'm suggesting, Professor Yulink said, that we have a universe's only representative of a species that achieved sapience under Class X conditions. The scientific value of that is incalculable. Security Chief Croton growled softly. And if she becomes unstable, if her predator instincts activate, then, said a new voice from the conference room entrance, you'll have bigger problems than university security protocols can handle. Everyone turned to see Sarah Chun standing in the doorway, apparently having arrived for an appointment that no one remembered scheduling. Miss Chun, Chancellor Mordock said, hoping his voice didn't betray the mild panic he was feeling. How long have you been standing there? Just arrived, Sarah replied cheerfully. Your assistant said you wanted to speak with me about my course selection, though I couldn't help overhearing the part about predator instincts. Are you discussing animal behavior patterns? The faculty members exchanged glances. Sarah's hearing was apparently as enhanced as everything else about her. Please take a seat, Chancellor Mordock said, gesturing to an empty chair. We were indeed discussing some concerns about your unique background. Sarah sat down, and several faculty members unconsciously leaned back from the table. Her movements were fluid and economical, confirming Dr. Kinthus's observations about her physical capabilities. I hope I haven't caused any problems, Sarah said, looking concerned. I know having an exchange student from a restricted system creates extra administrative work. Actually, Dr. Tessara interjected, we're more interested in understanding your educational background. Your professors are reporting that your problem-solving approaches are unconventional. Sarah looked puzzled. Unconventional how? Professor Zephyrian cleared his throat. Miss Chun, how exactly does meteorology relate to hyperspatial navigation mathematics? Oh, that, Sarah said, brightening. Well, both involve calculating optimal paths through three-dimensional fluid dynamic systems under the influence of multiple gravitational forces. The math is basically the same, just scaled up to cosmic proportions. And you learned this from studying weather patterns? Dr. Kinus asked. Among other things. On Earth, if you can't predict weather changes, you die. Simple as that. So we get pretty good at reading atmospheric conditions, pressure differentials, thermal dynamics, and vector analysis. The room fell quiet as the faculty members processed this casual statement about life or death weather prediction as a basic survival skill. Miss Chun, Chancellor Mordock said carefully, could you help us understand what constitutes normal education on Earth? Sarah considered this. Well, it varies by region, but basic survival skills are taught from early childhood. Weather prediction, terrain analysis, flora and fauna identification, risk assessment, first aid and trauma medicine, resource procurement and purification. Trauma medicine? Security Chief Croton interrupted. Sure, when a nearest hospital might be hundreds of kilometers away and a medical emergency can't wait for transport, you need to be able to handle everything from severe lacerations to anaphylactic shock to compound fractures. And this is normal childhood education? Professor Yulink asked faintly. In most regions, yes. Then, there are specialized skills depending on your environment. Coastal areas teach swimming in dangerous currents, marine predator recognition, storm surge survival. Mountain regions focus on avalanche awareness, altitude sickness prevention, cold weather survival. Desert areas cover heat stroke prevention, water conservation, venomous animal first aid. Dr. Tessaro was taking rapid notes. What about traditional academic subjects? Mathematics, science, literature? Those are integrated into survival training, Sarah explained. Mathematics through ballistics, navigation, and resource calculation. Chemistry through water purification, food preservation, and understanding toxic substances. Physics through tool construction, structural engineering for shelter building, and energy systems management. So human education is essentially military survival training disguised as academic curriculum, Dr. Kinus observed. Sarah looked confused. Military? No, just normal life skills. Though I suppose the principles are similar. Chancellor Mordock felt a strange ringing in his ears that he dimly recognized as the sound of his worldview being systematically demolished. Miss Chun, he said, what was your family's profession? My parents were biological research scientists. They studied biodiversity and ecosystem management in tropical rainforest environments. And this was considered safe work. Professor Zephyrian asked. Sarah laughed, and the sound somehow managed to be both pleasant and slightly unnerving. Safe is a relative term. My mother was only hospitalized 3 times for venomous bites, and my father never had any injuries worse than a broken leg from a jaguar encounter. Only 3 times, Security Chief Croton repeated weakly. Well, she was really good at reading animal behavior patterns, Sarah said proudly. Most researchers in that environment expect at least a few serious injuries during their career. Dr. Kinus activated her datapad and began making urgent notes. This conversation was providing more insight into human psychology and culture than 6 months of theoretical research. Miss Chun, she said, could you help us understand human recreational activities? Sure. What would you like to know? What do humans do for entertainment? Sarah's face lit up. Oh, lots of things. Sports are really popular. Basketball, soccer, American football, hockey, rugby, mixed martial arts, extreme sports like rock climbing, and base jumping and big wave surfing. Mixed martial arts? Professor Yulink interrupted. Combat sports where contestants use various fighting techniques to defeat their opponents. It's great exercise and really builds confidence in crisis situations. And base jumping? Jumping off tall structures or cliffs with a parachute. It's all about precise timing and environmental awareness. Really helps develop spatial reasoning and stress management skills. The faculty members were now looking at Sarah with expressions that suggested they were beginning to understand that her casual attitude toward danger wasn't a personal quirk, but rather a fundamental characteristic of her entire species. What about less physical activities? Dr. Tissera asked hopefully. Well, there are intellectual competitions like chess, poker, debate tournaments, academic Olympics, strategy games that simulate everything from business management to military conflicts. And of course, there's entertainment media, movies, books, music. What kind of movies? Chancellor Mordock asked, though part of him didn't want to know. All kinds. Action movies with spectacular fight scenes and explosions, horror movies designed to trigger fear responses, thrillers that create psychological tension, war movies that depict historical conflicts. And people watch these for enjoyment? Security Chief Croton asked. Absolutely. The adrenaline response is really exhilarating. Plus, they help prepare you psychologically for crisis situations by exposing you to controlled stress scenarios. Dr. Kinus closed her datapad and looked around the table at her colleagues. The picture that was emerging of human culture was both fascinating and terrifying. They had evolved not just to survive in a dangerous environment, but to actively seek out danger as a form of entertainment and personal development. Miss Chun, she said, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what made you decide to leave Earth for Galactic University? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Well, Earth's isolation meant that our scientific knowledge was pretty limited to our own biosphere. I wanted to learn about how life develops under different conditions, what kinds of evolutionary pressures create different adaptations, that sort of thing. And you weren't concerned about leaving such a stimulating environment for something more peaceful? Oh, I don't mind the peace, Sarah said cheerfully. It's actually quite relaxing. Though I have to admit, I'm a little worried about getting out of shape without the constant environmental challenges. The silence that followed this statement stretched on for nearly a full minute. Miss Chun, Chancellor Mordock said finally, would you be interested in participating in some additional academic activities while you're here? Perhaps guest lecturing or participating in research projects? Sarah's face lit up with enthusiasm. That would be amazing. I'd love to contribute however I can. What did you have in mind? We're still working out the details, the Chancellor replied diplomatically. But I think we can safely say that your presence here is going to create some unique educational opportunities. After Sarah left the conference room, the faculty members sat in stunned silence for several minutes. So, Professor Yulink said eventually, we have a student whose species considers constant mortal danger to be a normal living condition, who is educated through survival training that would challenge our military forces, and who seeks out additional danger as a form of recreation. Don't forget, Dr. Kinus added, that she's consistently demonstrating problem-solving abilities that surpass our faculty members in their areas of expertise. And she's worried about getting out of shape, Security Chief Croton concluded. Chancellor Mordock looked around the table at his distinguished colleagues and realized that Kepler Prime University was about to become the site of the most significant academic experiment in galactic history. I think, he said slowly, we're going to need to completely rethink our educational methodologies. Dr. Tessara raised her hand. Chancellor, I'd like to formally request that we establish a new field of study, human survival pedagogy. Granted. The Chancellor replied immediately. Dr. Kinus, I want you to begin developing protocols for safely observing and documenting human educational techniques. And if she becomes unstable, Security Chief Croton asked. Chancellor Mordock considered this question seriously. Chief Croton, given what we've learned today, I don't think there's any force in this sector of the galaxy that could handle an unstable human. Our best strategy is to make sure she stays happy, healthy, and academically challenged. He paused, looking around the room at his faculty. And pray to whatever deities you believe and that she never gets bored. Outside the conference room, Sarah Chin walked across campus toward her dormitory, humming an old Earth song and completely unaware that she had just redefined the entire field of galactic education. Behind her, she left the university administration desperately trying to figure out how to manage a student who represented the living embodiment of evolution pushed beyond all previously understood limits. It was going to be an interesting semester. 3 weeks into the semester, the ripple effects of Sarah Chen's presence at Kepler Prime University had spread far beyond the campus boundaries. Academic conferences across the galaxy were being hastily reorganized to include emergency sessions on Deathworld evolutionary theory and extreme environment pedagogy. Research grants were being redirected towards studying human physiology and psychology. Most significantly, enrollment applications for Kepler Prime had increased by 3,000% as academics from across the Confederation sought to observe the human student in person. Dr. Kinus found herself at the center of a scientific revolution she had never asked for. Her personal research schedule had been completely overtaken by demands for data on human biology, psychology, and educational methodologies. Every major university in the galaxy wanted copies of her observational reports. The Confederation Science Council had classified her work as Priority 1 research, meaning she now had unlimited funding and a staff of 12 graduate assistants. She also had a massive headache from trying to explain to distinguished scientists why none of their theoretical models applied to anything Sarah Chen did. Dr. Kinus, her research assistant Jenna Kolvar, announced as she entered the lab, the quantum physics department is requesting another consultation. Apparently, Ms. Chen has suggested modifications to their theoretical framework for faster-than-light communication that could revolutionize interstellar travel. Dr. Kinus looked up from her analysis of Sarah's latest blood work. The human's biological markers continued to defy explanation. Her immune system showed adaptations for dealing with pathogens that simply didn't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Her muscle tissue operated at efficiency levels that should have been thermodynamically impossible. Her neural patterns suggested information processing capabilities that bordered on superhuman. What was her basis for the modifications? Dr. Kinus asked. Something about applying principles from Earth's migratory animal navigation systems. Apparently, several species on our homeworld can navigate across entire continents using quantum magnetic field detection. Of course they can, Dr. Kinus muttered. Schedule the consultation for this afternoon. What else? The Department of Stellar Engineering wants to know if Ms. Chen would be willing to review their designs for atmospheric processors. They're hoping her experience with extreme weather systems might provide insights into handling gas giant atmospheres. And the Linguistics Department? Still analyzing her language patterns. They say human communication includes at least 17 different information channels that other species don't possess. Vocal tone, micro-expressions, body language, scent markers, electromagnetic field variations. Dr. Kinus rubbed her temples. Sometimes I think we're studying an entirely different category of life form. Dr. Kinus, Jenna said carefully, I've been thinking about that. What if we are? Explain. Every analysis we've done suggests that humans evolved under conditions that shouldn't allow for intelligent life. The radiation levels, atmospheric composition, gravity fluctuations, geological instability, any one of those factors should have prevented complex evolution, let alone consciousness. Dr. Kinus looked at her assistant with interest. Jenna was a Rigelian, member of a species known for their analytical thinking and pattern recognition abilities. Go on. What if humans didn't evolve naturally on Earth? What if Earth was some kind of testing ground or training environment? The implications of this suggestion hit Dr. Kinus like a physical blow. If humans were artificially evolved or designed, it would explain their impossible adaptations. It would also mean that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a civilization capable of engineering life forms that could survive under Class X conditions. That's a terrifying thought, Dr. Kinus said slowly. Or, Jenna continued, what if Earth isn't as unusual as we think? What if there are other worlds like it, and humans are just the first Deathworld species we've encountered? Dr. Kinus activated her research terminal and began pulling up classification data for every known planet in the galaxy. If Jenna was right, if there were other worlds with similar characteristics to Earth, then humans might not be unique. They might be representatives of an entire category of life that the Confederation had never imagined existed. The thought was both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. Meanwhile, across campus in the university's state-of-the-art gymnasium, Sarah Chun was inadvertently causing the latest in a series of minor panics among her fellow students. She had joined the university's recreational athletics program, figuring that regular exercise would help her stay in shape while dealing with the relatively low-stress environment of galactic academia. What she hadn't anticipated was that her definition of recreational exercise would prove to be radically different from galactic norms. Currently, she was using the gymnasium's zero-gravity chamber, designed to help students from low-gravity worlds adapt to standard atmospheric conditions. The chamber's settings were calibrated for beings who found normal gravity to be uncomfortably heavy. Sarah was using it to simulate rock climbing. "Is that safe?" asked Veltar Kos, a Centaurian student who was supposed to be using the chamber for low-impact cardiovascular therapy. Instead, he was pressed against the observation window, watching Sarah navigate the chamber's obstacle course at speeds that defied belief. "I don't think safety applies to her species," replied his workout partner, a draconian named Kikasra, who had been following Sarah's activities with the fascination of a professional predator studying an apex competitor. Inside the chamber, Sarah was moving through a three-dimensional maze of floating obstacles, using handholds and momentum to propel herself from point to point in a graceful dance that looked effortless and perfectly controlled. What her observers couldn't see was that she was actually taking it easy, moving at perhaps 30% of her maximum capability. To them, she looked like a being of pure kinetic energy, flowing through space with an economy of motion that suggested perfect body awareness and reaction times measured in milliseconds. Professor Quindar, Veltar called to their supervising instructor, "Is this normal human exercise behavior?" Professor Quindar, an elderly Altarian who had been teaching physical education for over 2 centuries, was studying Sarah's performance with an expression of professional bewilderment. "I've been reviewing human athletic records," he said slowly. "According to the data, Miss Chin's performance is actually below average for her species." The students stared at him in stunned silence. "Below average?" HFY repeated. "Human athletes regularly perform feats that would challenge our military special forces. They engage in competitions that involve deliberately subjecting themselves to extreme physical stress for entertainment purposes." On cue, Sarah completed her circuit of the obstacle course and gracefully landed near the chamber's exit. She was breathing slightly harder than normal, but showed no signs of fatigue. "That was fun," she announced as she exited the chamber. "Though the gravity settings make it a lot easier than it would be on Earth. Do you have any higher difficulty programs?" Professor Quindar checked his equipment. "Miss Chun, you just completed a course designed to challenge trained military personnel on the highest difficulty setting." Sarah looked surprised. "Really? It felt pretty straightforward. Maybe the obstacles are just spaced differently than what I'm used to." "What kind of obstacles are you used to?" Veltar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Well, natural rock faces, mostly. Cliffs, canyon walls, ice formations. The challenge is dealing with unpredictable holds, weather changes, equipment failure, wildlife encounters." "Wildlife encounters?" HFY interrupted. "Sure. Mountain goats, big cats, various birds of prey. Eagles can be particularly aggressive if you get too close to their nests. And you always have to watch out for loose rock. A falling stone can kill you just as easily as a predator." The gymnasium fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. "Miss Chun," Professor Quindar said carefully, "human recreational activities involve mortal danger." Sarah looked confused by the question. "Well, not mortal specifically, though I suppose any physical activity carries some risk. Rock climbing is actually pretty safe if you know what you're doing and take proper precautions." "What would you consider dangerous recreation?" HFY asked. Sarah thought about this. "Free solo climbing, I guess. That's rock climbing without safety equipment. Or base jumping in unpredictable weather conditions. Whitewater rafting through Class V rapids. Storm chasing. deep cave diving. With each activity Sarah mentioned, the expressions of her listeners grew more horrified. And humans do these things voluntarily? Veltor whispered. Oh yes, Sarah said enthusiastically. They're incredible experiences. There's nothing quite like the feeling of pushing yourself to your absolute limits and discovering what you're truly capable of. Professor Quindar was taking notes as fast as his tentacles could move. This conversation was providing invaluable insight into human psychology and culture. Miss Chun, he said, would you be interested in demonstrating some Earth exercise techniques for our students? I think it would be educational. Sarah's face lit up. I'd love to. Though I should warn you, Earth techniques are pretty different from galactic standards. We tend to focus more on functional fitness for real-world applications. What kind of real-world applications? HFY Sarah asked. Survival scenarios, mainly. The ability to run long distances while carrying heavy loads, climb vertical surfaces, swim in dangerous conditions, fight off predators, navigate difficult terrain in poor visibility. Fight off predators? Veltor repeated faintly. Well, you hope it never comes to that, Sarah said. But it's always good to be prepared. My father always said that the most dangerous predator is the one you're not ready for. Professor Quindar made a mental note to request hazard pay for supervising Sarah's demonstration classes. As Sarah headed for the showers, the remaining students gathered around Professor Quindar with expressions of mixed fascination and terror. Professor, Tikasura said, I have a theoretical question. Yes. What would happen if Miss Chun ever felt threatened? I mean, really threatened, not just academically challenged or confused by social customs. What if something triggered her survival instincts? Professor Quindar considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. He had been studying the physical education requirements for human military forces, and the results were sobering. Human soldiers were trained to function under conditions that would kill most galactic species. They could operate effectively while injured, exhausted, psychologically stressed, and cut off from supply lines. And that was just basic training. I think, he said slowly, that would be a very bad day for whatever was threatening her. How bad? Veltor asked. Professor Quindar looked toward the showers where Sarah was humming another Earth song, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just redefined the entire field of physical education. Let me put it this way, he said. I've been reviewing Confederation military records to understand human combat capabilities. According to the data, humans have never lost a war against any non-human adversary. Never, never. Every conflict between humans and other species has ended in complete human victory, usually with casualty ratios that our military analysts initially assumed were recording errors. The students absorbed this information in silence. So, when Miss Chin talks about fighting off predators as a basic life skill, HFY Sisera said slowly, she's referring to combat training that would challenge our elite military units. That appears to be correct. Veltar looked toward the showers with a new level of respect and wariness. Professor, do you think she knows how dangerous she is? That, Professor Quindar replied, is probably the most important question we can ask. Because if she doesn't know, then she's operating under the assumption that everyone around her is equally capable. The implications of this hung in the air like a toxic cloud. And if something ever forced her to discover the truth, Tefezra concluded, it might change everything about how she interacts 3 weeks into the semester. The ripple effects of Sarah Chin's presence at Kepler Prime University had spread far beyond the campus boundaries. Academic conferences across the galaxy were being hastily reorganized to include emergency sessions on Deathworld evolutionary theory and extreme environment pedagogy. Research grants were being redirected towards studying human physiology and psychology. Most significantly, enrollment applications for Kepler Prime had increased by 3,000% as academics from across the Confederation sought to observe the human student in person. Dr. Kinus found herself at the center of a scientific revolution she had never asked for. Her personal research schedule had been completely overtaken by demands for data on human biology, psychology, and educational methodologies. Every major university in the galaxy wanted copies of her observational reports. The Confederation Science Council had classified her work as Priority 1 research, meaning she now had unlimited funding and a staff of 12 graduate assistants. She also had a massive headache from trying to explain to distinguished scientists why none of their theoretical models applied to anything Sarachin did. Dr. Kinus, her research assistant Jenna Kolvar, announced as she entered the lab, the quantum physics department is requesting another consultation. Apparently, Miss Chun has suggested modifications to their theoretical framework for faster-than-light communication that could revolutionize interstellar travel. Dr. Kinus looked up from her analysis of Sarah's latest blood work. The human's biological markers continued to defy explanation. Her immune system showed adaptations for dealing with pathogens that simply didn't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Her muscle tissue operated at efficiency levels that should have been thermodynamically impossible. Her neural patterns suggested information processing capabilities that bordered on superhuman. What was her basis for the modifications? Dr. Kinus asked. Something about applying principles from Earth's migratory animal navigation systems. Apparently, several species on her homeworld can navigate across entire continents using quantum magnetic field detection. Of course they can, Dr. Kinus muttered. Schedule the consultation for this afternoon. What else? The Department of Stellar Engineering wants to know if Ms. Chun would be willing to review their designs for atmospheric processors. They're hoping her experience with extreme weather systems might provide insights into handling gas giant atmospheres. And the Linguistics Department? Still analyzing her language patterns. They say human communication includes at least 17 different information channels that other species don't possess. Vocal tone, microexpressions, body language, scent markers, electromagnetic field variations. Dr. Kinus rubbed her temples. Sometimes I think we're studying an entirely different category of life form. Dr. Kinus, Jenna said carefully, I've been thinking about that. What if we are? Explain. Every analysis we've done suggests that humans evolved under conditions that shouldn't allow for intelligent life. The radiation levels, atmospheric composition, gravity fluctuations, geological instability, any one of those factors should have prevented complex evolution, let alone consciousness. Dr. Kinus looked at her assistant with interest. Jenna was a Rigelian, member of a species known for their analytical thinking and pattern recognition abilities. Go on. What if humans didn't evolve naturally on Earth? What if Earth was some kind of testing ground or training environment? The implications of this suggestion hit Dr. Kinus like a physical blow. If humans were artificially evolved or designed, it would explain their impossible adaptations. It would also mean that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a civilization capable of engineering life forms that could survive under Class X conditions. That's a terrifying thought, Dr. Kinus said slowly. Or, Jenna continued, what if Earth isn't as unusual as we think? What if there are other worlds like it? And humans are just the first Deathworld species we've encountered. Dr. Kinus activated her research terminal and began pulling up classification data for every known planet in the galaxy. If Jenna was right, if there were other worlds with similar characteristics to Earth, then humans might not be unique. They might be representatives of an entire category of life that the Confederation had never imagined existed. The thought was both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. Meanwhile, across campus in the university's state-of-the-art gymnasium, Sarah Chun was inadvertently causing the latest in a series of minor panics among her fellow students. She had joined the university's recreational athletics program, figuring that regular exercise would help her stay in shape while dealing with the relatively low-stress environment of galactic academia. What she hadn't anticipated was that her definition of recreational exercise would prove to be radically different from galactic norms. Currently, she was using the gymnasium's zero-gravity chamber, designed to help students from low-gravity worlds adapt to standard atmospheric conditions. The chamber's settings were calibrated for beings who found normal gravity to be uncomfortably heavy. Sarah was using it to simulate rock climbing. Is that safe? Asked Veltar Kos, a Centaurian student who was supposed to be using the chamber for low-impact cardiovascular therapy. Instead, he was pressed against the observation window, watching Sarah navigate the chamber's obstacle course at speeds that defied belief. "I don't think safety applies to her species," replied his workout partner, a draconian named Sarah, who had been following Sarah's activities with the fascination of a professional predator studying an apex competitor. Inside the chamber, Sarah was moving through a three-dimensional maze of floating obstacles, using handholds and momentum to propel herself from point to point in a graceful dance that looked effortless and perfectly controlled. What her observers couldn't see was that she was actually taking it easy, moving at perhaps 30% of her maximum capability. To them, she looked like a being of pure kinetic energy, flowing through space with an economy of motion that suggested perfect body awareness and reaction times measured in milliseconds. Professor Quindar, Veltar called to their supervising instructor, "Is this normal human exercise behavior?" Professor Quindar, an elderly Altarian who had been teaching physical education for over 2 centuries, was studying Sarah's performance with an expression of professional bewilderment. "I've been reviewing human athletic records," he said slowly. "According to the data, Miss Chen's performance is actually below average for her species." The students stared at him in stunned silence. "Below average?" HFY Story repeated. "Human athletes regularly perform feats that would challenge our military special forces. They engage in competitions that involve deliberately subjecting themselves to extreme physical stress for entertainment purposes." On cue, Sarah completed her circuit of the obstacle course and gracefully landed near the chamber's exit. She was breathing slightly harder than normal, but showed no signs of fatigue. "That was fun," she announced as she exited the chamber. "Though the gravity settings make it a lot easier than it would be on Earth. Do you have any higher difficulty programs?" Professor Quindar checked his equipment. "Miss Chun, you just completed a course designed to challenge trained military personnel on the highest difficulty setting." Sarah looked surprised. "Really? It felt pretty straightforward. Maybe the obstacles are just spaced differently than what I'm used to." "What kind of obstacles are you used to?" Veltar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Well, natural rock faces, mostly. Cliffs, canyon walls, ice formations. The challenge is dealing with unpredictable holds, weather changes, equipment failure, wildlife encounters." "Wildlife encounters?" "Sure. Mountain goats, big cats, various birds of prey. Eagles can be particularly aggressive if you get too close to their nests. And you always have to watch out for loose rock. A falling stone can kill you just as easily as a predator." The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. "Miss Chun," Professor Quindar said carefully, "human recreational activities involve mortal danger?" Sarah looked confused by the question. "Well, not mortal specifically, though I suppose any physical activity carries some risk. Rock climbing is actually pretty safe if you know what you're doing and take proper precautions." "What would you consider dangerous recreation?" HFY Story asked. Sarah thought about this. "Free solo climbing, I guess. That's rock climbing without safety equipment. Or base jumping in unpredictable weather conditions. Whitewater rafting through Class V rapids. Storm chasing. Deep cave diving." With each activity Sarah mentioned, the expressions of her listeners grew more horrified. "And humans do these things voluntarily?" Veltar whispered. "Oh yes," Sarah said enthusiastically. "They're incredible experiences. There's nothing quite like the feeling of pushing yourself to your absolute limits and discovering what you're truly capable of." Professor Quindar was taking notes as fast as his tentacles could move. This conversation was providing invaluable insight into human psychology and culture. "Miss Chun," he said, "would you be interested in demonstrating some Earth exercise techniques for our students? I think it would be educational." Sarah's face lit up. "I'd love to. Though I should warn you, Earth techniques are pretty different from galactic standards. We tend to focus more on functional fitness for real-world applications." "What kind of real-world applications?" HFY Story asked. "Survival scenarios, mainly. The ability to run long distances while carrying heavy loads, climb vertical surfaces, swim in dangerous conditions, fight off predators, navigate difficult terrain in poor visibility. Fight off predators? Veltar repeated faintly. Well, you hope it never comes to that, Sarah said. But it's always good to be prepared. My father always said that the most dangerous predator is the one you're not ready for. Professor Quindar made a mental note to request hazard pay for supervising Sarah's demonstration classes. As Sarah headed for the showers, the remaining students gathered around Professor Quindar with expressions of mixed fascination and terror. Professor said, I have a theoretical question. Yes. What would happen if Miss Chun ever felt threatened? I mean, really threatened, not just academically challenged or confused by social customs. What if something triggered her survival instincts? Professor Quindar considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. He had been studying the physical education requirements for human military forces, and the results were sobering. Human soldiers were trained to function under conditions that would kill most galactic species. They could operate effectively while injured, exhausted, psychologically stressed, and cut off from supply lines. And that was just basic training. I think, he said slowly, that would be a very bad day for whatever was threatening her. How bad? Veltar asked. Professor Quindar looked toward the showers where Sarah was humming another Earth song, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just redefined the entire field of physical education. Let me put it this way, he said. I've been reviewing Confederation military records to understand human combat capabilities. According to the data, humans have never lost a war against any non-human adversary. Never. Never. Every conflict between humans and other species has ended in complete human victory, usually with casualty ratios that our military analysts initially assumed were recording errors. The students absorbed this information in silence. So when Miss Chin talks about fighting off predators as a basic life skill, Teachwaisasura said slowly, she's referring to combat training that would challenge our elite military units. That appears to be correct. Veltar looked toward the showers with a new level of respect and wariness. Professor, do you think she knows how dangerous she is? That, Professor Quindar replied, is probably the most important question we can ask. Because if she doesn't know, then she's operating under the assumption that everyone around her is equally capable. The implications of this hung in the air like a toxic cloud. And if something ever forced her to discover the truth, Teachwaisasura concluded, it might change everything about how she interacts.